Hi there, it's CEPA Fellow Carrie Oderman. Welcome to the CEPA Podcast, where we bring together leaders and experts from both sides of the Atlantic to explore the biggest challenges shaping our world today. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of the CEPA Podcast. My name is Jason Israel, and I'm the Auterion Senior Fellow for Defense Technology at the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, as we call it. I'm very honored today to have with me the retired Admiral James Foggo, who is a distinguished fellow at CEPA, Dean of the Center for Maritime Strategy and former commander of the U.S. Sixth Fleet and commander of Allied Joint Forces Command Naples. Thanks for joining the podcast, Jamie.
Hey, Jason, it's great to be here on CEPA's podcast, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Great. Well, look, this is in many ways, Jamie, a continuation of things on which you've been speaking, on which I've been writing over the last couple of weeks, and of course, what the world's been watching, what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz right now, but of course, the greater Middle East and the many dynamics that are ongoing. So that's going to be our focus today. We're going to do about 20 minutes here, so why don't we just dive right into it? One of the things that I've been monitoring what you've been discussing recently have been what really is a blockade when it comes to sort of the legal sense, the military operational sense. Right now, of course, we're amidst this blockade. Thus far in the early days, it seems to have been effective in some ways, but there are, of course, a lot of questions being raised about it. Where do you think this blockade falls in terms of this an act of war, yet also a tool of coercion? Would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, Jason, thanks. Great question. And you're right. Technically speaking, a blockade is an act of war. It's something that the United States Navy has done for hundreds of years. If you consider the Barbary pirates, the Barbary Wars, blockades of north coast of Libya, and later in the future, during the Civil War, when the Union Navy blockaded the Confederate Navy in the southern ports and effectively strangled the economy of the South. Weapons couldn't get in, gunpowder, uniforms, foodstuffs, and that sort of thing. And the South could not compete with the industrialized North. So this is something similar in a different century, but being used as a tool of coercion or compellence to get a result out of the Iranians. And, when we talk about active war, people, kind of stiffen when you say that, but it's also illegal and not in accordance with the UN Convention on Law of the Sea to form a toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz, which is no one country's strait. It's an international strait. It's everybody's strait, and charge a couple of $1 million per oil tanker going through. If you do the math, 100 ships a day, $2 million each, and extrapolate that over 365 days, that's $73 billion. That's more than the U.S. Navy shipbuilding budget, SCN, for the current FITA. And that would give the Iranians the opportunity to reconstitute the military force that we've just taken away from them for a reason. So it also puts pressure on the Iranian economy. 90% of their oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, as well as foodstuffs and other goods and services in and out. So this will deeply affect their economy. It's a cost-imposing strategy. It's not to be cruel. There are 90 million people in Iran. Not everybody is a member of the IRGC. It's to bring them back to the table to negotiate a peace. And I think it's effective, because I heard the president this morning and the Secretary of War's press conference this morning, and it looks like we're going back to the table to have that discussion, to continue that discussion after Vice President Vance went to Pakistan last week.
Well, thank you for that overview, Jamie. And there's a couple maybe larger questions that maybe I'd like to get at here while we're talking. The first one is, because we have these day-to-day dynamics, is what are plausible ways that this could go from here? And maybe I'll talk a little bit about just two of the many historical analogies that have been talked about. But one is the tanker wars of the 1980s, and the other is much more recent in Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea, where the U.S. Navy was doing a lot to guard merchant shipping from the Houthi threat. So as we kind of come to this broader question, which of course I'll turn over to you as well, about what you think policymakers need to be understanding most? What are some key points they need to understand about getting back to what we would call normal? There's just a couple observations that I've made and would love your thoughts on them. But one is, when we look back to the tanker wars, one of the similarities I see is, of course, that wartime insurance for merchant vessels popped up rapidly in the first several weeks, very, very quickly, and then took a long time to come back down to normal. The number I've seen for normal, for a wartime insurance for a merchant ship going through the Strait of Hormuz, is about 0.25%, the baseline before this war, the Epic Fury, began. Right now, it's sitting, at about 8 to 12 times that, in some cases higher. But when I looked back at the numbers here for the tanker wars, it went up very quickly again. It took, by some counts, about 3 to 5 years to get it back down below 1%, because of concerns of the possibility of returning to a conflict status, but also because the strait was mined. And we've seen reports that there are questions about where those mines actually are. And then I know you've talked a little bit this month as well about what it would take to kind of restore confidence that the strait has been demined. So we could talk about that as well. The second analogy, which is Prosperity Guardian, of course, the geography is different. And then the international coalition came a bit quicker, even though there were multiple levels of commitment. We're seeing a little bit more hesitation from allies and partners on committing. So that's something that will be interesting to look at, to see in the coming weeks and months how allies and partners step up. So those are a couple things that come to mind for me when it comes to policymakers should be thinking about. And I'm thinking both about my previous work in various J5 shops, but also at the National Security Council as we put together Prosperity Guardian. But really love your thoughts about what we should be considering, maybe even what policymakers or myself are missing when it comes to the longer term reopening of the strait, as we're all calling it.
Right. Well, on the coercion versus escalation of the conflict, could this go kinetic? I think that the ball is clearly in the Iranians' court. It's their choice if they want this to go kinetic, and it's not going to go well for them if it does. So if there's a threat to a U.S. warship or a transiting tanker of some sort, then they will be punished. And the one thing I think that they understand clearly from this campaign, Epic Fury to date, is that the United States Navy or the United States Joint Force will not hesitate to use force to invoke an outcome that is advantageous for us and our allies. The sinking of the Dina, the Iranian flagship, is a clear signal to them that, frankly, we're not messing around. I mean, I sympathize for the loss of life of the young people and the young sailors that were on that ship. However, it sent a very powerful message. And I believe that's why in the last few days, when warned on Channel 16, the international channel, bridge-to-bridge communication, about 20 of tankers that were considering transiting and leaving the strait turned around and went back to their port or their anchorage, because they know we're not messing around. So that's point number one. On the issue of insurance, it's fascinating, isn't it, how we can go from a baseline and rocket up and then take, in the case of the tanker wars, 3 to 5 years to come back down. I hope that's not the case for a couple of reasons. One, there's really the three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judiciary. And there's actually a fourth branch in this administration. That's the market. And the president listens to the market. The market tanked. And most recently, in the last few days, the market has come back up to its previous level or record levels. So as people around the world are looking at this conflict, I think they're taking solace in the fact that it is starting to wind down. The fact that the ceasefire has held, the fact that there were peace talks, and the fact that there could be a return to the table for additional negotiations are all good things. I'm sure you've read a recent, by the way, your piece, A Playbook to Clear the Strait of Hormuz, which we can talk about in a minute, on the issue of Operation Prosperity Guardian and what happened in the Red Sea is absolutely fantastic. I'd commend it to all of our listeners and the folks at CEPA. And you really do capture the difficult nature of the geography, the threat, the feeling of standing on the bridge of a ship, whether it's a civilian ship or a Navy ship, knowing that there's an inbound fast missile coming at you and you have one choice, and that is, or one thing to do, you got to knock it down. So really, really good work there. The other piece that I was going to refer to is by Javad Zarif in Foreign Affairs about a week ago, how Iran should end the war, a deal Tehran could take. When I read that, and he's educated in the United States, was the foreign minister, part of JICPOA. You're probably familiar with him. You may have even met him. The guy tends to be one of the more logical, reasonable actors on the Iranian side. He says, look, the fact that we are resilient enough to stand up and maintain the fight, that we have decentralized our leadership after being decapitated with those 42 people that died in the first days of the war, means that, we can take a win. That's his opinion. I don't share it. We can take a win, and therefore we can't suffer any more damage. They've inflicted tremendous damage on us. Time to open up the straits, no conditions, and time to put some restrictions on the enrichment of uranium, and then go after the allies of the United States for compensation reparation. I don't think the latter is going to happen. But the fact that he said that, he had to have been blessed. He is a vice president for strategy to the president of Iran. I think people pay attention to these kinds of things and they go, that's probably their best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA, right? And if that's where we're starting from, then we can probably get this thing back in the box and maintain a ceasefire, if not a lasting peace. I hope so. So I hope to see the rates come down. Now, you're exactly right on Operation Prosperity Guardian. The big difference, geography. So a couple of bathtubs, the Arabian Gulf and the Red Sea, really difficult to fight in. Heck of a place to put an aircraft carrier, and we've had carriers in the Red Sea fighting and conducting counterstrikes on the Houthis. Very, very dangerous business, and trying to protect some of the merchant traffic that's in there. If you look at the geography, the Red Sea is about 1,400 nautical miles long. The Gulf is about 650 nautical miles from the northernmost point down to the Strait of Hormuz. So you would think, well, the Gulf is smaller. No, it's not. It's wider. It's a much bigger body of water, harder to protect. But the difference between Prosperity Guardian and Epic Fury is, I think, Prosperity Guardian, if you want to take a crude analogy to high school sports, JV football versus varsity football in the Gulf. Why do I say that? The Houthis were being armed by the Iranians. So they had some of their systems, but not all of their systems, and not the best of their systems. The Iranians have depth on the bench. So they have the IRGC. They have thousands of Shahed drones. They have thousands of these FAC-FIAC, fast attack craft that can come out with missiles or weapons, guns, or suicide bombs on their ships to attack our ships, very much like the Ukrainians have done in the Black Sea. And so it's a much more robust threat in the Arabian Gulf, and therefore a much more difficult challenge. And let me just leave it there and kick it back to you, Jason.
Oh, well, thank you. And you mentioned some of the both geographical restrictions, but also the volume when it comes to aircraft carriers. But of course, an aircraft carrier with the group that it has.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen numbers in sort of the mid-20s when it comes to the number of ships that are around. And then, of course, I think we have the George W. Bush, last I heard, steaming around Africa to avoid the Red Sea to come in. So that might be quick sailor math. Maybe about less than 2 weeks away from being able to come back in. And I'm trying to think back. Besides some sort of overlap messaging periods, we have to go back pretty far to when we had three carriers in one place as well. So great point there. I think we've kind of talked about some plausible ways of this moving forward, maybe some off ramps to conflict. And as you point out, there are interests on all sides in finding off ramps. So that is reassuring. One thing I keep thinking about is and you've written on this as well, Jamie, is what innovation is involved in the industrial base right now particularly the Maritime Industrial Base. And your Center for Maritime Security recently put out a piece, I think it was just this week, peer review, which I commend to everybody as well. A great survey of 5 or 6 nations and their maritime industrial base position and some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to them. So definitely, highly recommend that to all the listeners here too. But one of the things when I think about now, what would it be like? Let's just picture 10 years if several of the recommendations you made, some of the things in which I wrote about in that article, which are the proliferation of unmanned systems with a common software layer across allies and partners. And what would that mean in a situation like we're in right now, if we could have these unmanned systems in all domains, air, sea, subsea, conducting blockades and escort operations. A similar situation, instead of large surface combatants doing most of the escort and blockade work, we would have networks of unmanned systems kind of shaping the environment, not just responding. Uncrewed surface vessels escorting commercial ships, unmanned aerial systems, tracking traffic and identifying spoofing, which we've read about a lot in the last week, including in New York Times with Windward's report yesterday. Autonomous underwater vehicles continuously sweeping, not just for mines, but for other UUVs, which are becoming more similar to mines all the time. But this shift is platforms, but it's also this connectivity. And my question, being someone who has literally been in command trying to build coalitions between US and European partners, is that a plausible future where the allies and partners get on a common C2? And I'll just mention right now that, as I mentioned with Prosperity Guardian, we're seeing less just direct contribution from allies and partners, and maybe some of that is due to not wanting to put people in harm's way. So the broad question is this future of both innovation in the industrial base, as you've written about, but also in this scenario, how would you, putting our futurist hat on, think about, is this a plausible future? Are we on track for it? And if not, what do we need to do to get on track for it? Because it just sounds like there could be a lot of technological solutions to the problems we're facing that we're already starting to see signs of, but we're not there yet.
Sure, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that is, the emerging disruptive technologies and the evolutionary technologies that are being used in the battle space now. Not something that's happened overnight. I give Admiral Brad Cooper, who's now the CENTCOM commander, who was formerly the Fifth Fleet commander, a lot of credit for his instantiation of Task Force 59. And for those of you that are listening that don't know what Task Force 59 is, it was the first unmanned task force tied to a fleet headquarters in the Arabian Gulf. And Admiral Cooper went around with allies and partners of the Gulf Cooperation Council and also some members of NATO that operate in the Gulf, and got them to join this task force, which tried to create a common operating picture of what was happening in the Gulf 24/7 with unmanned or autonomous systems. The report you mentioned, peer review, leveraging the Allied Maritime Industrial Base, is about shipbuilding, but it's about the future of shipbuilding and using industry best practices from our allies and partners who have embraced autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, robotics in shipbuilding, and also digital twins to move us forward into an era where labor is short. We can substitute for labor with some of these autonomous systems, whether it's in a shipyard or whether it's in the Arabian Gulf, the same principle applies. And so Admiral Caudle has embraced the fact that drones and unmanned ships and unmanned aviation vehicles and unmanned subsurface vehicles are coming. But the preponderance of the United States Navy for the next 30 years are going to be our carriers and our destroyers and our future frigate and our submarines. And those are hardware with software, people on the inside. So they're going to still be manned platforms. He embraces and likes the idea of a hedge strategy, and that is unmanned systems. So you would much rather put an unmanned system forward at risk than an Arleigh Burke destroyer or, God forbid, a Ford-class aircraft carrier, because you don't want to, one, lose the platform, And if you do, you want to lose a platform that doesn't have any people on it, and it's less expensive. So we've moved in that direction, and there's been a lot of discussion about why did the United States Navy take the Avenger class minesweepers out of the Arabian Gulf? They were old. They were around when I graduated from the Naval Academy, brand new ships then. One of my classmates commanded one 16 years later. So that's late 1990s, 40-year-old platforms. We needed to upgrade and modernize. So what did the Navy do? It took a 21st century solution and took the littoral combat ship and put unmanned surface vehicles on board, able to be deployed from that ship, that do both mine mapping and mine sweeping. So one can listen with a sonar and ping with a sonar and figure out where the mines are and map the minefield. The other one has influence detonation and acoustic detonation. And there's a helicopter, and the helicopter has a brand new system called ALMIDS, Airborne Laser Mine Detection System. It can look below the surface and see the mines in the shallow water of the Gulf or in the Strait of Hormuz. And it also has a remotely piloted vehicle you can drop in the water to go after the mine. So that's technological solutions to 21st century problems. Now, when you talk 2030 and beyond, apply artificial intelligence to that network and just think of the possibilities with the leaps and bounds we're taking in AI. Sooner or later, yes, you will have a flotilla of manned ships operating with unmanned ships. Sooner or later, we may have a smart flotilla that is completely unmanned and capable of going into, a very risky, hostile situation and resolving the problem without getting anybody in the friendly force killed or injured. So I have high hopes that technology will contribute to the future peace that we all hope for soon in the Arabian Gulf.
Well, thank you, Jamie. And I think, here we are already at our time. It's always flies by when I'm talking to you. But I think that last point about both AI and what technology will come into fruition, it's moments like this that we can, when we're in budget meetings and we talk about trade-offs in what we're going to spend money on, it is moments like this, moments in history that we can say, this could have helped solve, this problem. So I'm very interested by that. And your point on AI, there is a high hope, of course, that AI can bridge some of the gaps in interoperability, acting almost like a sort of translator between systems and helping to fuse data and connect platforms that weren't originally designed to work together, which of course we will have. One of the things we focus on at CEPA is how the many NATO allies are beginning to spend toward the new commitment of 5% of GDP, and how that spending will be done toward systems that are or are not interoperable. AI, of course, we have a lot of hopes that will do that. In the meantime, of course, as a policymaker, I look at what can we do now to try to, be ready for that. And so anything from data privacy to data security and how we can make sure that AI will do that. These are not things that we're thinking about or necessarily on the front page when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz right now, but I'm thinking about them because perhaps later in my Navy career, still a Navy Reserve officer, although I'm, of course, here in my CEPA Fellow capacity as I'm not on duty, I think about those and the future of the fleet. Would love to continue this discussion. Our next one, I think we could just spend 20 minutes talking about mines and countermine in the future. But Admiral, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an honor being on the podcast with you. Thank you all to our listeners. Admiral, I'll turn it over to you for any final words.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I'd just like to wrap up with one thing, a quick sea story. And, the Center for European Policy Analysis represents the interests of a group of allies and partners across the Atlantic and throughout Europe, not just in the Black Sea area, but everywhere in the NATO alliance and beyond. And when I worked for Admiral Stavridis at SHAPE headquarters, he was the Supreme Allied Commander. It was my first one-star job.
Yeah.
Legend. I was his XO. He came in one day and said, we need a slogan. We need a mantra. And I always like to tap the wisdom of the crowd. So let's ask our constituents, the people that work for me, what they think our slogan should be. And as I recall, it was a lieutenant commander from UCOM that came up with the term stronger together. And Admiral Stav absolutely loved that. He was dual-hatted as the commander of UCOM and the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe for NATO. And it just spoke volumes of what an alliance and a partnership is all about. And so in these troubling times, as allies and partners try to make tough decisions of whether to come on board a coalition or whether to take risk, I leave everyone, including the American side, with that mantra, which is still very relevant today. We are stronger together. And Jason, I thank you and Alina Polikova for inviting me on the CEPA podcast.
All right, wonderful. And stronger together is the perfect way to end it. We'll see you again soon, Admiral. Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
All. Goodbye.
Talk soon. Bye.
If you enjoyed listening, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And to dive deeper into the issues shaping transatlantic policy, visit CEPA.org, where you'll find more expert analysis and research. And don't forget, you can find us all across social media for the latest updates, thought leadership, and exclusive content. Thanks for listening.